They lay on the hot concrete like forgotten toys. A skinny German Shepherd puppy and a ginger cat, pressed so close together it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The puppy's ribs showed with every shallow breath, yet he curled his paw over the cat's back as if to shield him from the world. His eyes, dark, wide, terrified, searched every passing face with the same silent plea, "Don't leave us." People stepped around them, their voices sharp and dismissive. A man muttered, "Don't touch strays." A woman in heels wrinkled her nose and quickened her pace. A child pointed, tugged at his mother's sleeve, but she dragged him away without looking back. The sun glared off the asphalt, the air buzzed with conversations, but not one person stopped. For this puppy and this cat, the world had already turned its back. I stood a few feet away, frozen. My wife clutched my arm, whispering, "Look at them, they're just babies." And she was right. This German Shepherd puppy was barely old enough to be weaned, maybe 5 months at most, yet he held himself like a guard dog, his frail body forming a shield around the trembling ginger cat. The cat buried its face into his fur, too scared to move, as though believing that if it stayed hidden under that paw, it would somehow be safe. I felt a knot twist inside me. I'd seen stray dogs before, stray cats too, but never like this. Never two lives wound so tightly together. Abandoned in plain sight, ignored by everyone. The pup shifted, trying to rise when I took a step closer, but his legs buckled. Still, he pushed his nose into the cat's side, nudging, reassuring. It wasn't himself he was worried about. It was the little feline he was trying to protect. In that moment, I realized what I was looking at wasn't just a stray pup and a stray cat. It was loyalty, desperation, and hope wrapped together on a strip of California pavement. A young shepherd dog who should have been chasing toys was instead fighting to keep another lost soul alive. A ginger kitten who should have been curled on someone's lap had learned to cling to a wounded puppy as its only family. I could feel my throat tighten. The crowd kept flowing around them like water around stones, but I couldn't look away. I could hear the German Shepherd puppy's shallow breaths, see the way his chest barely rose. I could see the way the cat's small body shivered against him. And I knew, deep in my chest, that if I walked away now, they wouldn't survive another day of waiting for someone who would never return. The sun kept beating down, my wife's hand pressed harder into mine, and then, while the world kept moving past, we stepped forward, and nothing in our lives would ever be the same again. The moment we knelt down, the little dog tried to rise again, his body trembling like a loose wire, his paw sliding protectively over the ginger cat. The shepherd pup couldn't weigh more than 30 pounds, his bones sharp under the thin layer of fur, yet his posture screamed, "Don't come closer to her." The small cat pressed against his chest, eyes wide, golden fur matted, tail wrapped around herself as though she wanted to disappear. Together they looked less like animals and more like children left behind at a bus stop, waiting for someone who was never coming back. I reached out slowly, letting the back of my hand hover near the puppy's muzzle. He didn't growl, didn't snap. He just stared at me, terrified and tired, as if weighing whether we were one more set of strangers about to abandon him. My wife crouched low, whispering softly, coaxing the cat with a quiet voice. The feline blinked but didn't move, its head tucked deeper under the pup's chin. The way that abandoned puppy curled around that stray cat broke something inside me. It was love forged out of desperation, and it was stronger than anything I'd ever seen. Around us, people kept walking. A teenager snickered. A man shook his head, muttering about disease. Someone else called them just strays. Each word was like a slap, a reminder of how invisible they were to the world. Yet the little canine and the frightened kitten refused to let go of each other. Even as the shepherd dog swayed on weak legs, he nudged the ginger cat closer, shielding her with what little strength he had. Life glanced at me, her eyes wet. They've been here a while, a vendor nearby told us, not even looking up from his stall. Couple weeks, maybe. People feed them scraps. No one takes them. He shrugged like it didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered to the small dog trying to be a hero when he could barely stand, and it mattered to the young cat whose only comfort was that furry pup's heartbeat. We couldn't move at first, overwhelmed by the weight of the choice in front of us. Taking them meant changing our lives, maybe turning our trip upside down. But leaving them? Leaving them meant their story ended on this concrete floor under the unforgiving California sun. The German Shepherd puppy's eyes locked with mine again, dark and pleading, and I felt the decision crash over me like a wave. We couldn't pretend we hadn't seen them. So, as the world kept walking past, we did the one thing no one else had done. We bent down, opened our arms, and made space for both of them. And the moment that fragile puppy let me slide my hands under his ribs, the cat clinging to his fur refused to let go, as if she knew that wherever he was going, she was going too. The pup weighed almost nothing when I lifted him, his body limp except for the faint tremor in his paws. The ginger cat clung to him, claws tangled in his dirty fur, refusing to loosen her grip even as we tried to separate them. My wife slid her arms around both at once, holding the frightened kitten close against the dog's chest so neither would panic. For a moment, it felt less like we were rescuing them and more like they were rescuing each other. Bound together by something deeper than fear, we carried them to the car, ignoring the stares, ignoring the mutters of crazy and don't touch strays. The little German Shepherd puppy whimpered once, a sound that was both weak and desperate, but then went still as soon as the cat pressed its head against his neck. The feline's orange fur shivered with every shallow breath, but it didn't run, didn't struggle. It seemed to trust the pup more than it trusted the world. And now we were part of that fragile circle of trust too. When we laid them on a blanket in the back seat, they didn't move apart. The small dog curled his long body around the cat, despite his ribs showing like sharp ridges beneath the skin. The kitten kneaded at his chest with tiny paws, like she was trying to coax his heart to beat stronger. Watching that little companion comfort her wounded guardian left us silent, the car filling with a heaviness that wasn't just sadness, it was responsibility. As we drove, the pup's eyes stayed open, fixed on us in the rearview mirror. He didn't blink, didn't close them, as if afraid we might vanish the way everyone else had. The ginger cat, though trembling, finally began to purr softly, her sound muffled against the shepherd pup's fur. It was like the melody of hope rising out of the wreckage of despair, faint but undeniable. We exchanged glances, my wife and I, both knowing without speaking that this wasn't going to be temporary. We couldn't just drop off a loyal puppy and his stray cat companion at a shelter and walk away. Not after seeing the way he guarded her, not after hearing the sound of her purr calm his trembling. These weren't two strays, they were a family, and now they were ours. But even as that realization settled into us, I felt a wave of panic. What if the shepherd dog was too sick to survive? What if the small cat had hidden injuries we couldn't see? What if we weren't enough to undo what had already been done? The questions swirled as we drove down that California highway, their little bodies huddled together in the back seat. And yet, through all the fear, I knew one thing for certain. We couldn't turn back now. The first stop we made was a gas station outside Bakersfield, just to let them drink and stretch. We laid a bowl of water on the ground, and the shepherd pup lowered his head slowly, tongue barely lapping, as though every swallow cost him strength. The ginger cat crouched beside him, her whiskers twitching, dipping her nose into the same bowl before pulling back nervously. They moved in rhythm, like they had learned to survive by sharing the little they were given. Watching them side by side, it struck me that this wasn't chance. This was a bond formed out of hunger, out of nights curled together on unforgiving concrete. My wife knelt down, holding out a bit of food. The small dog sniffed, hesitant, then glanced at the cat as if asking permission before taking it. When she gave a soft meow, the German shepherd puppy finally ate, breaking off tiny bites and pausing between them. The kitten edged closer and began nibbling too, and we realized they had learned to eat only when the other did, as though one couldn't exist without the other. It was heartbreaking and beautiful all at once. We decided it was time to give them names, something that would mark the moment they stopped being strays and started becoming family. The puppy, despite his thin frame and trembling body, carried himself with a dignity that reminded me of the night sky, wounded but still endless. I called him Orion, and the name felt right, like it had been waiting for him. The cat, fiery and cautious, needed something softer, something that carried warmth. My wife smiled and whispered, "Milo." The ginger cat blinked slowly, as if acknowledging it, before tucking herself against Orion's side again. Orion, Milo. Not just a dog and a cat anymore. Names gave them identity, a place in the world that had ignored them for too long. As I said their names aloud, I felt a shift. Like we weren't just saving animals, we were being chosen, pulled into their little circle of survival. The German Shepherd pup lifted his head at the sound of Orion, and the ginger kitten curled her tail around him when we said Milo. They belonged, not to the highway anymore, but to us. Yet the names didn't erase the reality staring us in the face. Orion's breathing was shallow, his wounds obvious even through the fur, and Milo's skittish movements hinted at weeks of fear etched into her bones. As we loaded them back into the car, I knew the real journey was only beginning. And with every mile we drove deeper into California, we carried more than strays in our backseat. We carried fragile lives, depending on us to keep moving forward. The drive to the nearest clinic felt endless, though it was less than an hour. Every bump in the California road made Orion's fragile body shift, and every time he stirred, Milo would press closer, her ginger fur brushing against his face as if to remind him he wasn't alone. We kept glancing back, hearts pounding, afraid we might lose them before we even arrived. The young shepherd dog's breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling like a flickering flame. The small cat never once moved from his side, her tiny paw resting against his ribs as if she could steady him herself. My wife whispered to him from the front seat, repeating his name, Orion, Orion, as though the sound alone could keep him tethered. Milo's green eyes flashed each time she looked up, wide and cautious, but when she heard his name, she blinked slowly, as if agreeing to share hope. In that back seat, the abandoned puppy and the stray cat were no longer nameless or invisible. They were a family, and somehow, so were we. When we finally pulled into the parking lot of a small veterinary clinic, the sun was dipping lower, throwing long shadows across the pavement. I carried the German Shepherd puppy in my arms, feeling every rib beneath his dull coat, while my wife cradled Milo against her chest. The little feline clung to Orion even as we tried to separate them for the walk inside, her claws catching on his fur. It was as if she believed that if she let go now, she'd lose him forever. People stared as we hurried through the door, but for the first time, the stares didn't sting, because we were no longer just witnesses. We were guardians. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw the pair. She didn't ask questions, only called for the vet. Within minutes, we were ushered into a small room, bright with harsh lights and the smell of disinfectant. Orion tried to rise from the table when Milo was set down beside him, his weak legs trembling, but he still positioned himself between her and the strangers in scrubs. Even here, even broken and exhausted, the loyal puppy acted like her protector. The cat pressed herself into his side, refusing to be coaxed away. The vet began the exam carefully, murmuring reassurances. He touched Orion's flank, listening to his heart, then moved to check Milo's weight. But every time the kitten let out a small cry, Orion tried to push himself closer, nose nudging her, eyes locked on hers. His wounds didn't matter to him, only she did. It was a kind of devotion I'd never seen before, raw and unshakable. I stood there watching, realizing that what we had stumbled into at that highway stop was something extraordinary. This wasn't just survival. This was love stronger than fear, stronger than pain. And as the vet leaned back with a grave look, we braced ourselves for the words that would decide their future. The vet's voice was calm, but his words weighed heavy. Orion was severely underweight, his body marked with untreated wounds and infections, and his dehydration was critical. Milo was healthier, though skittish, her ginger coat hiding fleas and a minor respiratory issue. "He's been keeping her alive," the vet said, almost in disbelief, as if even he could see how a German Shepherd puppy had chosen to put the cat first. Orion's weak heartbeat told one story, but the fact that he still pressed his muzzle against her side told another, that his will to protect Milo was stronger than the pain gnawing at him. We nodded through the list of treatments, feeling the cost of time and effort pressing down, but there was no hesitation. This abandoned puppy and stray cat weren't just a chance encounter anymore. They were Orion and Milo, and we were their people now. The vet started IV fluids for the shepherd pup, and we watched his chest rise a little steadier. Milo paced along the edge of the table, crying softly each time a needle slid into Orion's leg. The moment he shifted his nose toward her, she climbed right back against his side, curling into him as if no clinic, no strange hands could separate them. The sight tore at us. Here was a small dog, barely old enough to be called a growing puppy, standing guard with his eyes even when his body collapsed under him. And here was a frightened cat, trusting that as long as she pressed into her brave pup, nothing could hurt her. They weren't just surviving, they were teaching us what loyalty meant. My wife whispered, "They only have each other," and I realized that now they had us too. The vet explained the plan. Orion would need weeks of recovery, careful feeding, antibiotics, and rest. Milo needed safety and consistent care. He looked at us, almost asking if we were sure we wanted to carry this weight. We didn't need to answer. Orion's paw stretched across Milo's back even as the IV dripped. That gesture alone was enough. When the vet left the room, we stayed, sitting on the cold floor so Orion and Milo could see us eye to eye. The puppy's gaze softened for the first time, his eyelids heavy but no longer frantic. The cat's purring grew louder, a shaky engine that filled the quiet space. In that small clinic room, with harsh light overhead and antiseptic in the air, the world outside disappeared. There was only us, a rescued puppy and his feline shadow, and a fragile hope beginning to grow roots. But hope is fragile, and as we carried them out of the clinic that evening, Orion swayed in my arms, his body too light, too tired. And I knew then that saving them was only the first step. The real test of whether they could truly heal was still waiting for us at home. We didn't leave the clinic until late that evening. After several hours of fluids, injections, and quiet monitoring, the vet finally nodded and told us Orion was stable enough to go home, as long as we followed strict instructions. My name is Gideon, and signing those discharge papers felt heavier than any contract I'd ever put my name on. Beside me, my wife Clara leaned close, whispering, "We'll do this together." It wasn't just a promise to me. It was a vow to the little German Shepherd puppy and the ginger cat huddled against him. Back home, we made a space in our den, lining it with blankets and setting out shallow bowls of food and water. Orion, still frail, sank into the fabric, his legs folding under him. Milo climbed immediately onto his side, curling her small body into the shepherd pup's ribs like she had done 1,000 nights before. Even in the safety of our house, she couldn't be more than a breath away from him. The way the feline pressed her face into his fur told us she trusted him more than walls or people. We followed the vet's feeding plan. Tiny meals, slow and careful, so Orion's empty stomach could adjust. He'd sniff the food, glance at Milo, and only then take the first bite. The cat, quick and eager, waited until his jaw moved before nibbling herself, her tail flicking with each crunch. It was like watching a dance. Two souls tethered by invisible strings. Every mouthful was a battle, but also a victory, proof that both the rescued puppy and the stray cat still wanted to live. Clara and I sat on the floor, letting them come closer when they wanted. Orion's eyes, once so panicked, began to soften each time we said his name. Milo, the timid kitten, started creeping toward Clara's lap, her paws tentative but curious. The sound of her purring filled the room, shaky at first, then steady. It echoed through the shepherd dog's chest, calming him more than medicine ever could. I found myself reaching out, stroking Orion's bony head, feeling him lean just slightly into my palm. Clara laughed softly when Milo pawed at her shirt, demanding attention she'd been too afraid to seek hours earlier. They weren't healed, not even close, but in those fragile moments, we saw the first cracks in the wall of fear that had trapped them. When the night grew quiet, we left them curled together on the blankets, Orion's paw draped once more over Milo's back. His breathing was shallow but steady, her purr a low hum in the silence. And as Clara slipped her hand into mine, I realized that the hardest part wasn't behind us at all. It was just beginning. The first nights at home were restless. Orion would stir at the smallest sound, his young shepherd body twitching with dreams that seemed too heavy for such a small dog. Every time he startled awake, Milo would immediately press her tiny ginger frame tighter into him, her purr rumbling like a lullaby meant only for his ears. We kept a lamp burning low in the corner, so they never had to wake up in darkness again. Clara would whisper, "They need to know they're safe now." And I'd nod, though part of me wondered if they could ever believe it after what they'd been through. Morning routines became our anchor. I measured out the careful portions the vet prescribed, setting down bowls side by side. The German Shepherd puppy would sniff first, hesitate, then glance at Milo before finally eating. Only when the small cat leaned forward to nibble would he follow through, as though her courage was the permission he needed. Watching them share, bite for bite, was a reminder that survival had taught them to depend on each other, and we were the outsiders earning our way in. Clara started sitting cross-legged on the rug, holding out her hand. Milo, cautious at first, began testing the space between them, one paw forward, then another, until the timid kitten climbed into her lap. The look on Clara's face, tears mixed with the softest smile, told me just how rare this trust was. Orion, seeing his feline companion relax, allowed me to scratch gently behind his ears. The loyal puppy leaned his head into my palm for the first time, and I felt the warmth of life stirring under that fragile frame. But recovery is never a straight road. By the third day, Orion tried to stand longer, his long legs shaky but determined. The brave pup managed a few steps before collapsing back down, his chest heaving. Milo darted to his side instantly, tail wrapping around his paw as if to anchor him to the earth. My heart sank at the sight, one moment of hope followed by the reminder of just how weak he still was. We spent that evening watching them huddled together on the blanket, Orion's breath shallow, Milo's green eyes wide and watchful. Clara reached for my hand and whispered, "They're fighting, but what if love isn't enough?" I had no answer. The sight of that little shepherd dog trembling beside his ginger cat companion was both the most heartbreaking and the most inspiring thing I'd ever seen. And just when I thought we'd reached a fragile balance, Orion's body gave us a sudden shudder, his head dropping heavily against Milo's back, and the room seemed to freeze around us. Orion's head slipped against Milo's fur, and for a breathless second we thought we'd lost him. Clara gasped, dropping to her knees beside the blanket, her hands trembling as she reached out. The German Shepherd puppy lay motionless, his ribs barely moving, and the ginger cat cried out with a sound I'd never heard before, sharp, desperate, like she was begging him not to leave her. Milo pressed her tiny body harder into his side, pawing at his muzzle as if she could pull him back with sheer will. I scooped him into my arms, feeling the frightening lightness of his frame, his heartbeat fluttering weakly against my chest. "Stay with us, Orion," I whispered, not even realizing I was saying his name over and over. The small dog's head lolled, his breath shallow and ragged. Milo climbed up against me too, clinging with her claws, refusing to let the pup out of her sight. In that moment, it wasn't just me and Clara begging him to fight. It was his feline shadow demanding the same. We called the clinic, voices shaking, and the vet's instructions were quick and firm. Keep him warm, keep fluid steady, and get him back if he worsened. Clara wrapped him in a blanket, her hands cradling his fragile frame, while Milo nestled inside too, her ginger tail curling over his chest as though she could keep his heart beating with her touch. It was the image of survival itself, a rescued puppy and a stray cat refusing to be separated even on the edge of collapse. The hours that followed stretched endlessly. We sat on the floor, one of us always holding Orion, the other stroking Milo to calm her trembling. The young shepherd pup twitched with every breath, and each twitch made the cat press closer. I kept telling myself that a growing puppy has a stronger will than his thin body shows, that maybe his bond with Milo was enough to keep him tethered. Clara whispered prayers under her breath, her tears wetting the blanket, her voice breaking each time Orion shuddered. It was the longest night of our lives. The loyal puppy's breath stayed shallow, Milo's purring rose and fell like a fragile lifeline, and we sat helpless, caught between hope and despair. And then, just as dawn began to paint the California sky in pale gold, Orion stirred, lifting his head weakly and pressing his nose against Milo's ear, a gesture so small yet it felt like a miracle unfolding right in front of us. The first rays of morning light spilled across the room when Orion lifted his head, and it felt like the world exhaled with him. His nose pressed gently into Milo's fur, and the ginger cat answered with a loud, steady purr, the kind that vibrated through the silence like a hymn. Clara covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming, while I felt my chest break open in relief. After a night of despair, the young shepherd dog had chosen to stay. He was still weak, every breath shallow, but his eyes no longer looked vacant. They found Milo first, then us, and for the first time there was recognition, even trust. The German Shepherd puppy tried to push himself up, wobbling on thin legs that shook like reeds in the wind. Milo padded beside him instantly, circling like a guardian in reverse, her small body determined to steady her towering friend. Together they managed a few unsteady steps across the blanket, and though it was nothing more than a stumble, it felt like watching a child take his first stride into life again. Clara clapped softly, whispering encouragement, while I crouched low, holding out my hands in case he fell. Orion swayed, but when Milo brushed against his side, the rescued puppy found balance long enough to nuzzle her in thanks. It was as if his strength was drawn from her very presence. The little feline companion arched her back proudly, tail flicking like she knew she'd helped him conquer something impossible. We fed them slowly, spoonful by spoonful. Orion ate more that morning than he had in days, pausing often to make sure Milo had her share. When the kitten leaned over to lick his muzzle clean, I realized this wasn't just survival anymore, it was healing. The bond between a weak shepherd pup and a timid stray cat had become their medicine, and it was working. I leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally giving way to awe. Clara pressed her head against my shoulder, whispering, "This is a miracle, Gideon. He's not just surviving, he's fighting." And she was right. The young dog who had been nothing but skin and bone was standing again, because love refused to let him fall. By the time the sun rose fully over Bakersfield, Orion was curled back on the blanket, Milo tucked firmly against his chest, both breathing in rhythm. The worst night of our lives had turned into the morning of their rebirth. And as I watched the shepherd pup's chest rise stronger, steadier, I knew this was only the beginning of what they were meant to become. The days that followed felt like watching a garden come alive after a long drought. Orion's frame was still gaunt, ribs visible, but each morning the German Shepherd puppy pushed himself a little farther across the living room. His paws dragged at first, then steadied, until the young shepherd was able to stand tall enough to nudge Milo's food bowl with his nose before taking his own bites. Clara laughed through tears the first time he wagged his tail, slow, awkward, but filled with the kind of joy that had been absent for too long. Milo blossomed alongside him. The timid kitten who once trembled at every movement now strutted across the room with her ginger fur fluffed, chasing imaginary shadows, and then darting back to curl against Orion's side. When he lay down to rest, she stretched out over his back like he was her pillow, purring so loudly it filled every corner of the house. Watching a stray cat and a rescued puppy compete for attention, each vying for the comfort of a hand or a soft word, was proof of how far they had come from the cracked pavement of that service area. We began short walks in the yard, the shepherd pup's legs shaky but determined. Orion would stop often, looking back to make sure Milo was close, and if she lingered at the door, he would whine softly until the ginger cat padded out to join him. They were inseparable. The brave pup drawing strength from her presence, the feline finding courage in his shadow. Neighbors stopped to watch, some even asking where we found such an unlikely pair. I always said the same thing. We didn't find them. They found each other, and then they found us. Nights grew warmer in spirit too. Orion would curl on his blanket, Milo tucked into the curve of his chest while Clara read softly beside them. Sometimes Orion would roll onto his back, stop showing his belly in a gesture of total trust, his dark eyes calm for the first time. Milo would knead gently at the blanket before pressing herself deeper into his fur, as if staking her claim on the safety they had built. The transformation wasn't just theirs. Clara and I felt it in our bones, the way a once abandoned puppy and a once stray cat filled the silence of our home with new meaning. They had been invisible once, overlooked by hundreds of people, yet now they were the center of everything. And as I watched Orion lift his head higher each day, Milo perched proudly at his side, I realized the scars of their past would never define them again. Still, deep inside me, I knew this journey wasn't only about survival. It was about belonging, about proving that even the most broken can become whole when love finally finds them. And as the two of them settled into our lives like they had always been meant to be there, I felt the truth settle in. We hadn't just saved a dog and a cat, they had saved us too. Orion and Milo lie at my feet as I tell you this now. No longer the starving German Shepherd puppy and frightened ginger cat we found on the hot concrete, but family. When I look at them today, I see not just survival, but transformation. Orion's coat has grown glossy, his body strong, yet he still curls his paw over Milo's back each night like he did on that first day, guarding her as if the world might try again to take her away. And Milo, once a stray kitten too timid to meet our eyes, now climbs onto Clara's lap with boldness, purring loud enough to rattle the windows. Their journey changed us. We thought we were the rescuers, but really they rescued us. Orion taught me that even the weakest body can carry an unbreakable spirit. Milo showed Clara that trust, once shattered, can bloom again if you nurture it with patience. Together, this unlikely pair reminded us that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence, about choosing to stay when others walk away. Sometimes when Orion sprawls across the rug and Milo curls into his chest, Clara takes my hand and whispers, "Can you imagine if we had just kept driving?" The thought chills me every time, because these two souls, invisible to so many, deserved a chance, and all it took was someone to stop. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility, it's pet care. And when that care extends to a small cat who refused to let go of her friend, the miracle becomes complete. So I ask you, from the bottom of my heart, let their story remind you what compassion can do. Share it, talk about it, be part of it. Because every time a story like Orion and Milo's reaches someone new, another abandoned puppy or lonely cat might find the arms that will finally lift them out of the shadows. Join our brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.